Thank you, Florent. So good morning. My name is Jean-François Bobier. So I'm a BCG partner and associate director based in Paris, as you can hear from my accent. And I'm joined with my colleague Matt Languenet, who is a principal based in Boston. We are part of a research group called the Deep Tech Mission at BCG, and it was created based on the recognition that a lot of things that we used to think to be science fictions, like augmented reality, like AI, like synthetic biology, are now actually becoming a reality and we are the cusp of transforming businesses, and we think that it's the right moment, the right time to think about it and to prepare for this future. As Brad mentioned, we are in the middle of a great pandemic, and we just published a report recently, and we actually believe that the pandemic is only accelerating this trend and making this transformative change coming even more quickly than we anticipated. So we are actually very excited to be here today. And so what is a deep tech, you will ask me? I think there are two important characteristics behind what a deep tech is. And as you will see, quantum computing qualifies on both. First, a deep tech needs to be exponential. It needs, silicon has been for computing for a long time. As you know, Moore's law was typically an exponential law. You would double every 18 months computing power. This law is ending now, but fortunately for us, quantum computing will come to the rescue, but also other technologies. And another important trend and a characteristic of a deep tech is that it converges and reinforces one another, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So before let's say we talk about finance, we thought it was useful to most of us in the audience who probably don't know a lot about quantum computing, what it means and why it is so powerful and so transformative. So on this slide, on the right-hand side, you can see a typical computing, classical computing as we know it, where actually every day we use bits that are either 0 or 1, and we use calculations that are deterministic in nature. So basically sequence of operations that every time we apply them, we hope to get the same result. Entering now a new concept or paradigm called the qubit. A qubit is a strange thing. It's actually 0 and 1 at the same time. So like the rotating coin that you're seeing on the screen right now. So it's actually 0 and 1. And if you stop the coin, you will have maybe 50% chance to be tails or heads. And maybe after a few operations, you might be 70, 30, and so on and so forth. So the objective when you're doing a quantum computing calculation, if you will, is to manipulate the probabilities to get heads or tails in a certain way, and to get to the result that you want. Some very famous algorithms on quantum computing, so for example, Shor algorithms, gives you the factoring of a number in prime numbers with a 50% chance. So it might fail, and so you might have to run the calculation again. So that's why we are saying it's probabilistic in nature. So of course, playing with one qubit is interesting, but you don't do much. What is interesting is when you play with multiple qubits that are linked together with another bizarre phenomenon called entanglement. So basically, entangled qubits are qubits that interact with one another and that they basically constitute one single state. So let's say you do an operation on one qubit, it will have an impact on all the other qubits and the same around. And so for example, here on this diagram, you see that with only 3 qubits, we are able to have 8 different states at the same time, because these 3 qubits can be 0, 0 or 0, 0, 1 or 0, 1, 0, and so on and so forth. So with only 3 qubits, I have 8 states. And if I do one operation on at least 1 or 2 qubits, it will have an impact on all the qubits because, as you can imagine, the sum of all the probabilities of the states that you can see, so those 8 states, is always 1. So just manipulating one has an impact on the others. And so quantum computing gives you the possibility to do extreme parallelism calculation. Here, with 3 qubits, you have 2 to the power of 3. As you can imagine, when you have n qubits, you have 2 to the power of n states. So just imagine with only 30 qubits, you already have 1 billion states that you are playing with. Every time you do an operation, you do it simultaneously on the 1 billion states. Today, the best quantum computer is the one from Google that won quantum supremacy last year. It has already 33 qubits. So imagine what you can do with that already. So what we are looking for with quantum computing is to get an exponential speedup. It will not apply on every problem. I want to be clear, quantum computers will not replace classical computers. Actually, they will work together. We will have an hybrid future. The classical machines will do what they are best at doing, and they will be supplemented by quantum computers in very specific type of problems. But on those problems, we'll get an exponential speedup. And that's changed everything. It has implications in chemistry, it has implications in logistics, it has implications in material science, and of course, we will talk about it very soon. It has implications in finance. One last thing I would like to say about that is that we are seeing huge improvement in the technology. So you could say, yes, 53 qubits is a lot, but it's not that much. But actually, we are seeing that roughly we are seeing qubits doubling every year or so. There are plans that have been published by major manufacturers such as IBM. So for example, IBM has promised 1,000 qubits as soon as 2023, so it's very soon. And with a doubling foreseen until this decade. And actually, other competitors from IBM have published similar timelines. So of course, there are a lot of problems and technical challenges and scientific challenges that need to be overcome to get to the perfect machines that we are looking for. But we are seeing tremendous improvement in the coming years, and we believe that we could actually, in the next years, see some specific use cases becoming what we call an advantage. So basically, becoming something that practically is better than what you can do on a traditional machine. The difference between quantum advantage and what you heard, quantum supremacy, is that advantage is a practical use. Quantum supremacy is the same, but on a problem that is very theoretical and you would never find in the real life. So now let's talk a little bit about quantum in finance. And our team with Matt, we published a few days ago a report on bcg.com that we encourage you, of course, to look at. And we're going to share with you the main highlights today for the first time. And basically, we knew entering the research that finance would probably be one of the most impacted industry. And one of the reasons is that, as you know, finance is highly dependent on computing. Every financial institution typically spends several billions of dollars in IT every year, and that's for every single one. As you know, it's more than the GDP of multiple countries combined. So it's very significant. So finance computes every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every week, very important problems. And what our research has shown is that actually there are 3 areas where we can do better than what we have. and we could actually bring significant improvements. So the first area is optimization. There are many financial problems that rely on optimizing across a lot of constraints or variables. That can be the level of risk you want to take, that can be the exchange rate, that can be the unemployment rate, it can be the growth rate, that can be where the markets are heading, where the futures are heading, a lot of variables actually. And to solve against those variables, would need, if you were to do it perfectly, you would need an infinite time ahead of you. So you don't have this time, you need to compute quickly. So what you typically do is that you rely on heuristics or what we call local optimization. So you don't optimize for everything, but you optimize for a few variables. The promise of a quantum computer will be actually to explore all the possible variables and to get not only to, let's say, a good solution, but to get to the best solution and quickly. So that would be the first value. The second value is that finance rely more and more on machine learning. There are two good examples. One is credit scoring, obviously. You want to predict if a customer can qualify for credit and what are the conditions, what are the risks you are taking, what is the interest rate you could deliver to this particular customer, given his history, for example. Another type of area where machine learning is used extensively nowadays is fraud detection. And you have a vast amount of data you can analyze to prevent fraud. And this is where quantum computing is, we believe, an exponential technology, because here we have a strong interaction and intersection between AI and quantum computing with significant and powerful research that shows that when you combine those technologies, you get impressive results. So for example, we have already algorithms that could train neural networks with a quadratic speedup. So which is already a good speedup over what we can do today. And this is just training, but there are also algorithms that are good at improved predictions, for example. So a lot of areas, and we like it because it's at the intersection between AI and quantum computing. And the last area, which is probably a little more long-term, because it requires a lot of improvement also on the hardware side, is to replace a technique that a lot of banks use every day, every hour, every second, called Monte Carlo. So basically, it's when you're pricing an option or you're trying to assess the value of an asset, you need to do it against a certain set of hypotheses, and you enter in simulations. And again, it's the same as the optimization problem. You have a lot of variables you need to consider to do this assessment. And the number of variables is so high that you can't actually get the computation perfect. So what you typically do is that, and this is where the term Monte Carlo comes from. It's like a casino. You're throwing a dart, and then you make a calculation, and then you throw another dart, you do another calculation, you do multiple times, and then you average out, and you know that after a certain number of calculations, you'll get to the result you're looking for. There are two problems with that method. The first is that it does not get you the perfect result. Some very extreme tail risk, you might actually not see them because they are so little that you won't be able to take them into account. And there is another problem with this technique is that it's relatively slow. And for example, in many banks, computing the value at risk, which requires you to reevaluate all your assets that you have on your balance sheet, is only performed once a day because there are so many assets to compute, so many Monte Carlo calculations to make that you can't do it so often. So two problems that we think that quantum computers could solve. So we could make nearly exact simulations and more often. So during our research, we have been able to derive those three areas into 14 use cases. And now I will hand over to my colleague, Matt, who will describe some of them in more detail.
Thanks, Jean-Francois. Really appreciate it. And kind of before jumping in, just want to personally thank Brad, P33, and BCG for inviting me, and to the attendees for joining. Really excited about this. So Jean-Francois explained earlier how, unlike classical computers, quantum computers operate probabilistically versus deterministically, and simultaneously versus serially, thanks to three properties: superposition, entanglement, and maybe one he didn't mention, interference. And that allows them to explore many possibilities at once. To illustrate how this works, let me introduce a metaphor. And like essentially all explanations of quantum computing, it will be an oversimplification, but that's kind of the cost of doing business in the field. So imagine a computer is trying to solve a maze. The classical computer would exhaust every potential path in a sequence. If it came across a roadblock on the first path it tried, it would simply rule that out as a solution, revert to its starting position, and try the next logical path, and so on and so forth until it found a solution. That's the deterministic route. And that's the sequential route as well. A quantum computer would test every single path at once, in effect, solving the maze with a single try. So a lot of complex problems in finance are characterized by just this maze-like quality. And I'll discuss a few at a high level with the time we've got left here. But there'll be many, many more covered, I trust, today throughout the day. So the most obvious and well-scoped problems are around portfolio optimization, arbitrage optimization strategy, and trading costs optimization or execution analysis. Now, classical optimizers are used for all of these, but they're limited. They're limited not as much by the number of assets or the number of constraints, but by the type of constraints. Specifically, they struggle with non-continuous or non-convex functions. Examples of these are, include interest rate yield curves, trading lots, buy-in thresholds, transaction costs. These make the optimization surface too complex to calculate either at all or in a realistic, an advantaged time period. And these aren't trivial matters. Transaction costs, as many of you know, represent 2 to 3% of all assets under management. Adding these constraints to the calculation just makes the surface so complex that the optimizer can mistake a local minimum, as Jean-Francois was saying, for a global minimum, and therefore come up with the suboptimal convergence. Some quantum algorithms, such as QAOA or VQE, are early efforts to address this problem with shallow circuits, but the goal is eventually that traders would be able to insert constraints of these kinds. And in the nearer term, these inputs will be things like asset allocation limits, risk exposure limits that are more limited in scope. But I think sufficient accommodation of these non-convex, non-continuous constraints, could improve strategies up to 25 basis points. So that's our estimate. It's really, really significant when you spread that across the industry. Some other potential use cases of quantum computing that are further off, I'll go into now. They may require full-scale fault tolerance, and these are asset pricing and risk management. So let's start with asset pricing, or determining the fair market value of assets under management, including complex derivatives. So proprietary in-house solutions and third-party software packages are typically used for these. But Monte Carlo simulations of the entire price pathway tree are computationally intensive. They're really greedy, especially for longer-term complex derivatives. So to overcome this limitation, current models exclude some of the potential input variables that increase complexity and make the computation infeasible with a classical computer. The advantage in terms of a faster reaction time towards a negative market, it really can't be understated. Today, large risk simulations run overnight over the course of, say, 10 to 12 hours, often precluding banks from taking any corrective actions in real time. So one hedge fund analyst that we talked to noted that one Monte Carlo he ran to model demand shock impact took a month to converge, actually. And he started the simulation in February of 2020. By the time it finished, the stock market was down 25%. So contrast that with a world in which deep quantum circuits are possible, enabled by things like Monaro's algorithms for backtracking, branch and bounds, capabilities such as near-term risk assessment in real time for quant hedge funds, tail event defensive trading strategies, risk-driven HFT strategies. All of these things become possible. The reason that use cases like these are a long way off is that they're powered by these really, really greedy deep circuits, right? But if it's a long stick, there's a pretty big carrot at the end of it. If you think about there's something in the vicinity of 100 trillion in assets under management globally. About a tenth of that is managed with medium high complexity trading strategies. So just, I mean, 10 basis points of alpha on that would be 10 billion in value creation a year. There's a lot in the kind of path to value between where we are today and that end state. Things like, you know, recursive error correction, some form of distributed architecture, photon-based, for example. But as I said, it's a big carrot at the end of the long stick. In recent history, Jean-Francois started to allude to this. In recent history, no industry has been faster to adopt the vanguard technologies than financial services, where spend on IT for risk analytics alone is estimated to be between 6 and 9 billion globally. And spend on high performance computing is expected to top $1 billion soon. So it's no surprise that financial institutions have been among the first to start to invest in order to ramp up a quantum capability. But how should banks and other financial institutions go about building it from the ground up? We recommend a couple things. We recommend co-innovating with a quantum tech provider, whether it's a full stack enterprise provider like IBM through its Q network, or a startup like QCware or Xanadu. The most obvious reward is in potentially differentiated IP. And some of these partnerships are pursuing this goal with seriousness, and they're reaping early rewards. Barclays, for example, has an interesting paper out with IBM on quantum unconstrained binary optimization and mixed binary optimization approaches to the transaction settlement problem. And many of these experiments result in advantages that are at best theoretical, I've got to say today, meaning that the hardware has to catch up. But there are auxiliary rewards in terms of innovation and talent onboarding and upskilling. And these are really worthwhile pursuits. The fact is that there's a race for quantum talent up and down the stack in academia and industry, and banks are among those that are kind of first in on the bidding war. This is what we're going to show in just a moment is a highly directional kind of LinkedIn scrape, as we call it, but it shows that already major banks have profiles of 10 or more quantum proficient employees. One such, Marco Pistoia of JPMC is actually our next speaker. And while it's certainly the case that some of these profiles detailed on the chart are working at these banks in other capacities, not directly on quantum or quantum algorithms, it's also clear that banks are among the first to recognize that quantum computing isn't the sort of industry that you'll simply be able to buy your way into when the tech matures. There'll be real rewards in terms of IP and talent for the early movers. And so let me just close by saying that I'm personally passionate about the finance use case for quantum computing, because it's a testament to the fact that quantum computing is not just about triumphs in the lab, that it'll exert an important influence across industries. It may be true that nature is quantum mechanical, and therefore a quantum computer has certain advantages in simulating nature. But I think that the biggest reason that most of the use cases we've identified and scoped for quantum computing are related to simulation, whether it's drug discovery or materials design, is simply the fact that many of the folks building quantum computers are material scientists. And I think one unacknowledged constraint on progress in developing quantum computing is a lack of imagination and experimentation beyond a narrow set of core industries populated by those who studied quantum mechanics and, say PhD programs. The financial services industry, I think, is a really welcome exception. And I hope it's a bellwether for what's to come in this exciting field. Thanks very much.